All right, welcome everyone to the June webinar of the NZGDA. Today I'm joined by Juan Morais, who is a software developer. He's been at Pickpock, Sharesies, now currently at Virtually Human Studio. And we're going to be talking today about game and web development and how they cross over. So Juan has a lot of experience in this and a lot of thoughts. And I've also loved your tweets that you've been putting out in the last couple of days, where you're kind of digging deeper into how they cross over. So I'm excited to talk about all of that. And yeah, welcome to the webinar. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Carl. Happy to be here.
Cool. So before we get started, just a few small notes. This is being recorded and it's going to be uploaded to the NZGDA YouTube channel in the next few weeks. If you can't stay for the whole thing, feel free to just wait for that. Questions are welcome and you can just put them in the chat. This is a fireside chat that will run for the next 30-45 minutes. I've got a bunch of questions here, but you're more than welcome to drop some questions in and I can ask them on your behalf. So before we get started, Leanne Ross, our executive director, usually does the opening and closing karakia. I'm going to give it a go today. So I apologize for any mispronunciations or errors that I make, but I am learning and I just wanted to give it a go. So here we go. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia makinakina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he kua, he hauhu, te he Maori ora. And that means seize the winds from the west, seize the winds from the south, let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean, let the red-tipped dawn come with a sharpened air, a touch of frost, a promise of a glorious day. It was just a nice little kind of generic karakia I found, but it sounded really, really nice. Thought it was fitting. And yeah, so thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for your time. And let's get underway with the fireside chat. So Juan, first question I guess I want to ask, just I think it'll be important to give some context to those tuning in as to what your kind of experience is. And I'd love to know what when you say game development and web development, like what does that mean to you? And just so we can get those kind of definitions out the way first.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So I think one of the ways that I like to describe my roles and my experience is that when I went to do my studies in university, the bachelor's degree in software engineering, where I specialized in creating games. And so everything I was doing throughout my studies, which is a 3-year journey, was creating games for assignments and studying out what makes games fun and doing stuff like using engines, game engines. You might be familiar with Unity, Unreal, GameMaker, etc. Then I had the opportunity to delve into the space of more like traditional, I guess, development, which is just what I call web or just normal mobile applications. You have a website, you have an application like Facebook that requires a whole different way of thinking. And to me, I think, yeah, game and web development are just totally different things. But as a programmer or like as a designer, for example, there are many tools and ways of thinking that kind of cross over very well. Even if you're a producer, a product owner, manager, the ways that we create games and we create apps can be very similar, right? Games might be a bit more waterfall because it's just harder to plan for like 1 million people creating assets and doing all these things and testing, whereas apps might be a bit easier. But still, it's like I do think they're all part of technology and the technology landscape or software rather, because to make games, unless you're making a board game, most of the times you're making software. And when you make web apps or any apps, you're actually working with software to make, web applications, right? You might be using Google Chrome as your engine. You might be using Unity as your game engine. So it's kind of two different worlds that have lots of similarities, like distant cousins in a way. And yeah, I've got about 4 or 5 years. I've been a professional for like 5 years, I think, maybe less. I don't really remember when I started working. It was 2018, so I think just about 4 years. But I've done a plethora of things such as game programming, and I've done analytics, like data engineering, and I've done also just normal full stack engineering, I guess, like backend and front end stuff, which I can speak more about later. And recently I'm combining sort of full stack, web and backend, front end with 3D graphics programming. So it's a bit of a really cool mix of, for me at least, to be combining like what I've done in the past few years into one role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so based on kind of all of these different angles you've tackled developing software, do you think that there are any benefits that someone that might be solely focused on game development, like benefits that they might not be aware of with web, that you think are worth kind of mentioning or asking them to kind of do some research and investigation into?
Yeah, I think one of the first and biggest differences that I've noticed is with web, or like say startups in general that do web applications or do software as a service. Usually, you'll see it spelled as SaaS over the webs, and that just means that you kind of pay for software on a monthly basis. Like, say you pay for I don't know, well, Jira, for example, right? You use it as a software as a service, and in exchange you get a software. The main difference is that making software, or traditional software, is really fast compared to making games. Making games, we all know about delays, and when you promise if it's gonna come tomorrow, actually now we're gonna delay it 3 to 5 months, or maybe 1 whole year or 2 years. The nature of games is that we cannot quantify fun in a way, so we need to usually get builds and do sprints and take about 2 to 4 or 6 weeks to create something that a demo, a playable thing that people can actually go and take away. Whereas making apps, you don't really require the playability. You just need something to function and do execute a task. And so I think working on traditional apps has taught me a lot about prioritizing what's required, and so we might leave things that won't be used for everyone, or not, like might not have the biggest appeal, as nice to haves. And so many times I would go with product managers or product owners in my teams, and they would go and say, sounds cool, but we don't need it right now, so let's just put it in the backlog and keep it there. Whereas with games, sometimes I guess we want to just do everything and add so many things that we don't even know if it's going to work. So we like to tackle the big picture instead of going small bit by bit, and kind of just taking it in small prototypes, or a minimum viable products.
So what I'm kind of understanding is you think one of the benefits of web is just how kind of like they kind of strip the fun and the not strip the fun and the creativity out, but
Yeah.
but it is a lot more streamlined, and the iterative cycles are maybe shorter, and there's less debate, I guess. And that's probably saying that games, especially if the trend is that most games get delayed and most games become over budget, compared to like the SaaS industry that seems quite mature at this stage, with the teams that are very kind of used to those cycles. That does sound like a big lesson that game developers can learn. When talking about web apps and interactive media, so there's so many angles that we could take this conversation. Do you think that, so obviously building a game within web is another kind of question, and building interactive media within like a web application has its limitations and things. What are your thoughts on games, and and this is a kind of an area I might want to go deeper into, talking about HTML5 and WebGL and that kind of thing. What are your thoughts on the current state of interactive media within a web application?
I think it's as per usual it is with technology, with every day that comes, it becomes easier and easier to get into any space, and that's exactly the case as well with web development. With libraries like Three.js, they basically wrap WebGL, which is built on OpenGL, which is just a normal graphics library for any computer. It now lives on a browser actually, and so you can have a whole game living on a browser, and where you can read inputs. You can do things that you might work with within games, right? You can have loading screens, you can have menus, scenes, like the whole kit basically can come. And we even know that Unity and other engines also allow exports into WebGL, and a lot of them are beginning to do what's called sort of implementations with the Three.js library to sort of make development or exporting a game made in Unity, for example, to WebGL a lot easier, a lot more streamlined. And so that's something really cool. A big limitation though is that because you're not downloading an artifact or an app, you kind of have to load it every single time. And with things in web such as caching, you might say, well, we have the update of version 1.0 here, but we're introducing 1.1. And so your website, your browser might not know that the changes are coming. And you might see a bunch of weird, glitches coming around. And of course, the fact that you need to download this over like an internet speed. So you might have to design a web game with mobile constraints in mind, right? Instead of like having your really beautiful 4K textures, you might just have to go 1K texture or even less because you're loading so many things at once on a browser. And if you live in South Korea, you live in some parts of the United States, and that's no problem for you. But for the rest of the world, how do you load a game that can be played by someone in other countries, right, with like a DSL or well, a slow internet connection? And so that's one of the biggest challenges. It's more a logistical thing, I would say, though. And also the fact that there are a few engines that you can make games like inside a browser. For example, with Snap Games, I believe there's one called something like Playcraft or something. But you can make games inside a web browser. It sort of looks, like your typical game engine. You have a scene, you have objects, you have a hierarchy panel where you can say, okay, your parent is this, and if I move you, you move with your parent and all that stuff. But it's nowhere near as polished as like your Unreal Game Maker are. Just standalone apps.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other thread as game
Yeah.
development within a browser. Is that something you think is going to become more popular or easier to do? Do you think browsers are here to stay? Because that's another thing is with the whole app trend that kind of, I think, Apple brought to existence over 10 years ago, and having an app for everything is interesting. But I feel like browsers are starting to get a bit more popular and fleshed out and supported. What are your thoughts on that and where it's going?
Someone who uses Windows, Mac, and Linux every day, like I interchange them a lot. Having a browser-based solutions is super good for me. For example, there are apps. Well, most of the apps that I will look for nowadays have to be cross-platform, just because of what I said, right? I use so many systems, and this is really good because you can have a really slow machine from I don't know, 2010 that can load many apps in Google Chrome or Safari or Internet Explorer now died, but in Edge. And so I think it's really cool because it brings the part of accessibility, right? Where if your device maybe doesn't have the full power to run the native app, or maybe it just slows down if you load like 10 apps at once. This is something that browsers can sort of alleviate. Now, of course, if you have 100 tabs open like you do, Carl, then it might slow your computer away. But yeah, I think it's a really good thing because we don't have to worry so much about like, okay, I'm making a web app, but now I need to somehow find something that can turn this web app into a standalone app. And there are libraries that do that. For example, in the JavaScript world, one of the most popular ones is called Electron. But many developers who have worked with Electron know that there are so many limitations with Electron. It's a memory hog, so it's kind of like Chrome back in a few years, where the meme where like if you use Chrome, it's just gonna kill your memory RAM. And so, but I think people are more like sort of adopting the way of, okay, let's just have a web app. At Sharesies, we had a web app for about 3 years, and now we're starting to make, well, the mobile team started to make an actual standalone app. But the need for like a web app really wasn't there, besides people asking for a native app. But then you go, okay, well, why do you need a native app? I guess some people might say that it's better for them to have an app they can use on a phone, though. But if you have a browser, then you really don't need an app, right? So I think it also depends. Mobile users might prefer apps. I do, but if I'm on a computer, I'm fine having just the web version, if it's a good version, that is. Yeah, and over the years, I've stopped using so many standalone apps, and now I would just rather do the whole thing in the browser and just have my bookmarks.
Yeah.
Exceptions might be, programs I used to write code, and so, things like Zoom, although I use Google Meet all the time, and Slack. But most of these things you can actually use them in the browser, so it's not even an issue there.
Yeah, no, I remember when I downloaded Sharesies when it first appeared. They tell you the instructions of how to save it to your home screen.
Yeah.
And yeah, like that, because as soon as I guess there is a bit of you have to push through that barrier of actually doing it and setting it up on your desktop as a browser kind of link. But once you do that, it's just like any other app. It looks the same and it operates the same. And I think that's a really interesting distinction is browsers on mobile and browsers on a PC. And they're interoperable, but are there a lot of challenges with making something that is supported on a mobile, like in terms of the aspect ratio and the size of the buttons? Is that quite easy to detect when it's on a PC or a mobile?
Luckily, with something called CSS, or cascading style sheets, it is quite easy to determine if you're using a phone or a big desktop laptop device, whatever. But it does get hard, kind of the Android problem where like there are a million type of screens, and then it gets hard to kind of get the sizes done right. There are ways you can circumvent this though, but it's still kind of an issue in both areas where, in games you need to tackle some of the slower phones, where at least with the web you have browsers that kind of have like they're the engines that run and help you deal with most of the things. But for example, it's super common knowledge that if you have Google Chrome and Safari, they might have the same engine, but they behave in very different ways. Specifically, if you use an iOS device or a Mac device, websites or certain things you might expect to work properly on Chrome might not work properly on Safari or Firefox. There are websites that tell you compatibility issues. So for example, if you use library or thing X, then it might say, well, it's not fully supported by this browser yet, or it might be supported in a month's advance or something. So it's quite you have to walk some careful waters there, like depending on how complex you want to go. But if you just want to do the bare bones things and you use what's tried and true, then you can, get away with, I would say about 90% of what you actually want to achieve.
Yeah. I think this is a good moment to point out. I found this site the other day called gamesnacks.com, which is a project by Google, or one of the teams at Google. And it's pretty much HTML5 games that are supported in a browser, and they're kind of, all of them are in the kind of mobile aspect ratio. So they're interoperable between mobile devices and desktop, and the whole purpose is that they're small and easy to run games. And it was actually quite cool to jump into that and to play a few experiences there. And it's aimed at people that are in countries with low computing power. And I think that's quite neat, because it's a solution in one place. And I think with playing games through a browser, you don't know how much of a demand it's going to be on your PC or your setup beforehand. What are your thoughts on like games that are really complex that are browser based? Do you think there is like a limit to how complex games can be currently on web?
I think so, yeah, because well, if you download a game and you're running on your computer, it's a standalone app that your computer can chug every resource into. Whereas if you have a game on a browser, you really depend on the browser's, I guess, willingness to really let you like use all the computing power. Although that being said, a Virtually Human here, we have a few games that are web-based, and we have, things like skyboxes, and we have models, we have, the whole kit. It's not as complex as you would make a scene in Unity, but we have things like anti-aliasing, a couple of post-processing effects. I'm on the 3D team, so I've been working with this a bit, and they run surprisingly well. Like it looks really good for a browser. Like my first thoughts when I fired up the 3JS library I was talking about, I was just like, wow, this looks really good for, like I didn't expect the browser to, I guess, kind of render the way it did. And so that made me kind of hopeful for the future of what's to come in regards to games in the web. But of course, this means because you're loading things from the web, you have to sacrifice quality in terms of assets, so lower resolutions, lower polygon count, maybe your audio quality has to suffer a bit just to try to pack everything in just the one browser. So I think small games, mini games, or games that are actually super short have a really good benefit of living in the browser. Way better accessibility. Whereas games like, say, Fallout or AAA titles, I think it's quite unrealistic at the moment. Although, we're talking about cloud gaming, right? And the premise of playing games through Stadia or many of the new things that are coming up. And that, I think I'm really interested in seeing what's going to happen over the next few years, because I guess no one really knows what will be the huge benefit in tackling the thing of playing games with a low internet connection how will that come? Will you be able to play Fortnite through Google Stadia if you live in
Yeah.
Panama, or if you live somewhere with that has like super low internet quality?
Yeah.
That'll be super cool to see happening.
Well, it was really interesting because yeah, Google did kind of push for that vision, and I think they completely closed down and shut down all the projects that they had in development like a year ago. And the last kind of thing regards to cloud gaming that I saw recently is Fortnite partnered with Xbox Cloud Gaming to make Fortnite playable within a browser. And yeah,
Yeah.
that does get a lot more complicated because I think it uses like virtual machines and you're just kind of streaming it in. And there is like a whole, yeah, I think area of the industry, like AAA games that are trying to make it accessible through browsers. Because yeah, nowadays everyone's got devices and these companies want them to be playable in as many places and for as many people as possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a different kind of tangent to go down.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
probably maybe in a couple years time, if it's something they have, like the other thing is like Steam Deck is kind of a competitor to that, because they want, instead of browser based, they created a device that you can take with you to play the games that you get off Steam. And yeah, so that's another interesting thing. But for the people on the call, and I think a lot of the people that will be listening to this, what value do you see for indie devs using like a browser? And I think having like limitations to the tech, to like what how big your textures and things can be, could be a good thing for indie devs to just like put their proof of concepts out or put their projects out, through like itch.io. What are your thoughts on indie devs using games or publishing their games through a browser? Do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I'll clarify there's a question or maybe more in Spanish, and I'll gladly read and translate them later so everyone understands what's being said. And yeah, I think absolutely you can and you should, in a way, publish your demos on itch.io through WebGL. I've done this myself. I'm not an indie dev in search of like monetizing games, but the few games that I've made, I've tried to post them through WebGL. Some of them have gotten good reviews and have been picked up by people like Rock Paper Shotgun, which I was quite surprised. But this thing can happen. And yeah, if you want to say, hey folks, we have a demo, it's 1 to 3 levels of our game, shows the core mechanics. Obviously it's just a demo, so play around. And what better way to give a playable to someone than actually putting it where they don't have to download it, right? If you give me a demo, but it's I don't know, 300 megabytes and I have to download this thing, chances are it might hinder you in terms of trying to attract people to play it and give you feedback. But if you strip down the whole application and you give them I don't know, a 10 megabyte thing that can be playable with rougher assets, that demonstrates the core gameplay, though, this is what you want to test at the end of the day, right? I think it's really good, because then you can get the instant feedback and no one has to worry about like the download speeds or like, like I guess it's kind of it's a barrier. If I just give you a link, you click the link and the thing starts loading right away, cool, you're already kind of drawn in. But if I send you a link, you have to scroll down and say, okay, download. Where do I want to download, through Steam or through Epic, or do I want to do something else? It might detract you from it, right? Like it's very common that in these funnels or these user flows for many SaaS products, or many, for example, online retailer shops, right? It might detract the user from actually purchasing a product. And you can think of the same as when you implement a game. If you go into select the clothing item, okay, you found the size, luckily they have it in stock. Then once you're done with the whole thing, it requires you to create an account and log in. Personally, I quit right away if that's the case, if they don't let me do a guest login, because it's like, it's kind of mentally exhaustive, right? As if you go to a museum for more than 30 minutes, it can exhaust your brain with like the overload of everything happening. So I think, yeah, in a way, I would definitely urge you all and recommend you to just polish small demos in Itch and see if people give you any feedback. And you can get things like analytics. So people downloading this game, and they can also give you comments if you enable it, give you feedback on like, hey, I like this, or maybe I wasn't able to load it on this specific device, and you might go, okay, let's try to fix the bugs and stuff. So yeah, it's super cool.
Yeah. Before I get you to translate and answer the question from Roger, just on that note, we're talking about game jams, which I think a lot of the indie devs in the community and a lot of people engage in game jams in general. And from what I've seen in the ones that I've participated in, it's very clear that the ones that are web apps get 10 times the amount of plays and feedback than the ones that you need to download. And that's just like a very clear trend that shows just the value of having something that, because especially during game jams and when you're judging, you have to play probably 10, 20, 30 games, and you're constant, like if 5 games automatically load and you can play it within a couple minutes and kind of go through the game loop in 5 minutes, compared to having to, like, I downloaded, I think it was a 700 megabyte Unreal game for a game jam, and it was kind of broken, and just that whole experience was terrible. You go through all that effort, and I mean, terrible is probably a bit too harsh of a word, but that compared to a WebGL experience, I found a lot easier to lean in and just to be supportive of. So yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, when you create web apps, if a web app is broken, and we know it's broken in production, i.e. the live website where everyone can see it, let's say Facebook breaks the app, billions of users, literally. Someone can just come, have a read at the whatever happened, patch the bug, do a build. That could take them about 10 minutes for the whole process. So when you push your code and you say, hey, I want it to go live, then a container or something more something smarter can come and look at this code and say, oh, cool, so we have some changes, let's push it live, and a bunch of really cool stuff happens. And the last thing you know is like your website's fully live, it's cloud built supported, so you barely notice the downtime. With traditional games, it's like so hard because I was a big bug, right? I remember submitting builds for some of the games that I worked in, and sometimes they were broken, and we're like, we just got Apple to fully review and say our game's good to go, but we found some some game-breaking bugs. Now we have to patch the thing and ask Apple again to take about a week to hopefully please review this and get us the game to be on the spotlight and the what's called the what do they call it again? I forgot the name. The
front page.
Yeah, the front page thing. It's like the featuring of the game.
Yeah.
And so that's so chaotic. And so that also introduces the thing of crunch, where when you want to feature a game or have really cool stuff happen to it, it's like so hard because it's not as flexible as working with web. And I think this is also something that doing web development teaches you, is like how to prioritize the things that you really need and push them live, and then whatever else can really wait, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So I can answer the questions in order. So Roger asked 2 questions. So where were my initial studies in Panama? For those of you who don't know, that's where I'm from, and so I might have some friends over there who've come here. I started. Well, I did my high school, I guess, and then I went into a university that's called the Technological University of Panama. It's like super vanilla, but I did about a year there. Then I found out about New Zealand and studying games here, and I kind of applied in my 3rd semester, and so I had to ditch my 3rd semester. I was doing all this stuff like calculus and like super complex mathematics, and I just want to write code. I mean, it's good though because it taught me a lot about games anyway, like game logic. But yeah, in the 3rd semester I left and I went to New Zealand, and I didn't even finish it. I was said, so yeah, sorry. The second question is, if I want to start programming games, what should I learn first, and how can I make money in that kind of industry or profession? Well, I guess when someone asks you what should I learn, I always say just learn the simplest thing. But I would say even like try to find however you learn. I really like learning through videos. So I would find a video and I'd say how to make a ping pong game. That's the first game I ever made, and I did it through videos. So find something that's really simple and watch some follow along videos so someone can hold your hand, kind of like saying, do you do this, and then you do that, and then you do this, like super simple. You can use Unity, you can use Unreal. I mean, it really, like, I guess if you want to be more relevant to the industry, stay with those 2, because that's just what's used like in most of the studios, specifically Unity when it comes to the indie space. And you can learn C# with Unity, or you can learn C++ with Unreal. Obviously, C# is a lot simpler. So I could say, yeah, look up a Unity tutorial and how to make a super basic game and see if you find that difficult or hard. Do you like doing that? Because I think that can be a really good precursor for the difficulty of making games, which is just, it's really hard to explain how difficult games are like to make compared to everything else. And yeah, of course, you can make money in that industry. Both Carl and I work in the industry, and it's not as maybe lucrative as any like the startup industry or the SaaS industry. But I think now that I'm back making games, I'm just like I'm so much more engaged because this is the thing I love. It's like I've been jumping into Unity a few days ago, and it's like, oh, I just love being in this scenario, and I can just, like it's just happy zone. And so, yeah, you can definitely make Unity the profession. A lot of people, studios worldwide, they do what's called, like, I forgot the name, but they do an outsourcing. So let's say you have a studio that creates art assets, or you create code assets, and you can help other studios like kind of offload the whole thing they're doing. Like say, hey, this is simpler for you. We're gonna make 10 out of your 100 models, so you can offload some of the work that you have in your artists and stuff like that. Can says, so when you create a game for a browser, do you need to do different things for any browser, or just that one can run everywhere? Yeah, like Joshua said, with Unity, you only need to mark it as a WebGL. And yeah, I mainly just know it for Unity. I don't know for other engines, but usually if your thing runs, or you have an HTML file, that HTML file can run everywhere where a browser can read it. So it can go through Opera, Firefox. Again, the compatibility might not be 100%, but statistically speaking, a good chunk or most of people in the internet just use Google Chrome. So you can tackle that as a main priority, and then it might be Firefox and Safari, but they're really, really low numbers in comparison. And so it's a thing that you learn again with web development. Prioritize the big fish first, and then you can like try to figure out what's the problem that's big caused by Safari. I say this from experience. Safari just gives me so many problems, especially when I'm using my phone to test things. Chrome is beautiful, everything works. Safari it's broken, and so yeah, just try to use it in Chrome for now. Well, I think those are the questions until now, so we can continue.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. You mentioned kind of programming languages earlier, and this is me speaking from a producer's perspective that has very little technical knowledge of what programming, because I believe so Unity and Unreal both require different programming languages if you're kind of going to the programming level. In terms of web apps, is there like, could you walk through the hierarchy of what programming languages are needed for what platforms, or from your perspective, what you think is the preferred?
Yeah, cool. So, well, in web apps, you have, well, and we can think of game as well, but we usually have two ends. So we have the back end and the front end. The front end is everything that's visual, that you see, that you can interact with, right? It's the menu of your game. It's the gameplay thing that you interact with. The back end might be more, it's a system that handles data, handles requests. So say, hey, give me the count of apples that are for sale, and we'll go on the server and say, hey, give me that count, and I will give it back in the form of data. And then the front end might show that you have 5 apples. So quite distinctive things. You can use a million of different technologies for either of those. For the front end, though, the main one is JavaScript, which is the engine that kind of powers the browser or powers the internet. JavaScript is just what's being created for ages, and you can create. I mean, you can create things in the browser with other languages, but JavaScript is the main one. In the backend, you might have Node.js, which is JavaScript, but for the backend, so like you're already using JavaScript for 2 languages, you might see why it's already so popular, right? You don't need to learn a whole new stack of things. There's also Python, which Python is one of my favorite languages. Well, I would say it's my favorite after C#. It's because I have a lot of love for C# and Unity. You can do stuff like backend solutions to data engineering solutions to data science, and so it's just super versatile. I've also used C# for backend things with what's called the .NET framework. And so you can create a game in C# with Unity, and you can create a server in C# with .NET. And so it's the same language across both stacks, and you can have a server for your game if it's multiplayer. And you can also have your game working. And from there, there's just like way too many libraries. So it's just super hard to talk about what to use. I mean, most people in New Zealand use React. People in Panama use Angular, and those are just frameworks that allow you to make user interfaces a bit easier. So instead of having to say, let's create a button, and this button kind of looks different for every screen, you can create them or set them as components. So the whole term of reusability, right? If I make a button, I want it to be reusable across the entire app for what I want to make. So just so I don't have to worry about making the same thing over and over and over, and maybe I'll forget to add one thing and it just breaks it there. So it's kind of just like how you can make games.
Mm-hmm. No, that was a really good kind of overview of, yeah, just how apps are built, and no, I appreciate that. And so you mentioned earlier that Unreal is kind of a step into the unknown a bit, but do you kind of understand roughly how those frameworks are built?
Yeah. So the cool thing is, and I guess, well, another advice is if you want to learn programming, like learn the fundamentals of how computer science works. And so when I joined Virtual Human, one of my first tasks was to implement a networking solution in Unreal 4, where I had almost no prior experience, and I had never done Unreal Code before. So Unreal Code with C++.
Mm-hmm.
C++ is just a more powerful version of C#. It's more like if you think of a workshop, it's more like bare bones. You have to like really get into that with the tools. I had about 2 weeks. I'm like, well, I didn't, I kind of had the deadline of 2 weeks. And so I said, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to jump on the documentation for Unreal. I'm going to read online what people use for socket libraries. Cool. Found some libraries, started writing some code, started testing, and I got it done in the end. And, I turned it into blueprints, the whole thing with Unreal. I didn't know how to do any of these things, but I guess with experience, you know that you kind of want to tackle the big fish first and try to iterate small steps, just like how you would make a web app. And so, let's first try to establish a connection. Let's now try to get connection messages such as, has your thing been updated? Have you received a stop request from because somebody paused the game? Is someone shooting you? What kind of data has been sent? And then, it's kind of the same but different, like you it obviously is not your safe space, your safe haven, where like I know my way around Unity a lot better than I do my way in Unreal, even though I really want to learn Unreal because I know it's like really cool. But yeah, if you learn things properly in the fundamentals of programming, at least, or any skill set really, then you will do just fine with everything that they give you as well. I'm using this language called Elixir at my work for backend, and I've never seen anything like it. It's super confusing. But I tackled it the same way, and I was able to write some code. I'm still not like 100% sure on what the hell I just wrote, but I kind of just had an open mind and just went small steps and played around, and it kind of works. I don't even know how, but yeah, it's all about, I think, perspective and being like open mind to the fact that you won't always know technology. Matter of fact, you will never know or be up to date with everything that's going on. There's just way too many things happening all at once. And so you just have to be humble and know that, okay, what I know today might not even be relevant tomorrow. It might be deprecated. And that's fine. We're here to learn, right? Never stop learning.
Yeah, no, that's a good piece of advice. Never stop learning. And it's really cool to hear that from your perspective, though. I think the first step of learning a programming language, you kind of need to just close yourself and just try and find the understand how the basic infrastructure works, and just create a few projects. But it's awesome to know that even once you've stepped into that realm, you're still constantly learning and being exposed to new languages, new networks, new ways of doing things, which is really interesting.
Absolutely.
If you went back to study again, would you do anything differently? Obviously you mentioned you could learn something and that could be completely useless in the future. What do you feel like is a good safe bet right now to kind of invest your time in?
That's a really hard question, and a really good question as well. I would say a safe bet is just to learn the fundamentals of whatever thing you're working with. If you want to become a designer, learn the fundamentals of design. If you want to become a programmer, learn how programming works. Learn how computers read numbers and how to process zeros and ones into the things that we see today, into a Zoom app that we're talking through, and we have other people connected to it, right? That way, if the skill you use today becomes useless tomorrow, then you'll still have your foundations, your solid, strong foundations that will just make you go, okay, cool, then what do I use instead, right? And you won't feel like you've lost all your time. A lot of developers, especially us, who come into front-end technologies and who like learn JavaScript, would really like to learn the frameworks like React first, because they're just really useful. But if React, well, which it probably won't, but if it went to go bust tomorrow, then you'll be like in a void space where you don't really know much. And that's kind of how I went at it. And so I would if I was learning JavaScript again, I would just learn vanilla core JavaScript, which is what I'm doing right now, and I'm having a blast. I'm like, oh, I don't really need React because I'm just doing 3JS and JavaScript, and like it just makes sense. It feels a lot more like C# than React does, and so yeah, I think having that foundation of knowledge has really helped me in adapting to any scenario. If you want to go for games as well, I mean, Unity and Unreal, I don't think they're going anywhere soon. Most developers use them. Even AAA studios now are using Unreal Engine for, I think, Street Fighter and a few more series have been built entirely in Unreal. And now they're going into, well, I think some of them, I think Unity has stopped calling itself a game engine. I think it's not just a framework for creative stuff, because now they're catering to architects and the automobilistic kind of industry, right? The automobile industry, yeah. And so I don't think they're going to die anytime soon. I'm rooting for Unity. I mean, even if they get bought by whoever, which there could be rumors. I'm not starting any. It can happen.
Yeah.
I think it will still be a viable engine to use.
Yeah, I think it's there's no denying that game engines are growing in popularity, especially since COVID and since people becoming increasingly remote and building these like virtual worlds. And Meta doing stuff in the space. I think game engines aren't going anywhere. So if it's not Unity or Unreal, if there's another player that comes in, then I'm sure we'll know about it as soon as they try and compete with them.
Yeah, and the really cool thing is that they're all built on the same foundations. I was using the Facebook's it's called Spark AR Lab, so you can make AR sort of filters for Instagram or Facebook, and I also tried out the Snapchat Lens AR app, and they just feel like every other game engine. They feel like using Blender, they feel like using Unity, they feel like Unreal. They have transforms and you can rotate them, and if you press the W key, it should be for moving them. Like I think people realize that like this is how we usually work, and they might have the axis in a different way. It might be right or left-handed, but they just work the same way. And so I was able to make an AR app filter in like a few days because it's just so familiar. Like I think they all realize that like it's unified, and whatever you use, it would just take a little bit of time to kind of get used to how they do things. But and the same can be said with Amazon's Lumberyard engine and however many game engines are coming nowadays. I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Yeah, it's so funny. If we write down a list of all of the different engines and frameworks that we've mentioned in this call, it's already a huge list that would take you years to master each of them. So please write down any questions you have because time is running out. But one thing I want to just talk to you about, Juan, and I feel like you've done a lot of research into this recently, and it's an area that I think a lot of indie devs probably don't touch for a long time, and that's multiplayer. And I think in the context of web and game, in the last few years, I've seen a lot of web apps like Figma, like Asana, Miro, like adding these collaborative whiteboard experiences that kind of feel gamified in a way where it's kind of a lot of people collaborating. So in terms of like a web side, I think that's relevant. And in terms of games, just creating a multiplayer game is a completely different experience to like a narrative game or anything like that. And a lot of people listening to this might be interested in stepping into multiplayer. And I'd love to know, just from like a high level, when it comes to web and game, what are your thoughts on multiplayer, the challenges, the advice that you'd give? Yeah.
I think the main thing, if we talk about live websites on a browser, like Figma, or like I actually saw a tweet yesterday of people using 100 people continuously collaborating in Figma asynchronously. I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. That uses a technology called live sockets, which is a really fascinating piece of technology because you're sending live data at like super high speeds that can create these sort of things. The game we have, Zedron, if you can see live races actually happening on live time, and we're sending chunks of data every single second or every couple of milliseconds with positions of the horse, where are you, etc., etc. A lot simpler for games. You usually need to have or you're sending so much more data, right? You need to do stuff like if you're shooting a bullet, you need to send the position where it's been shot at, the speed of the bullet, the trajectory, kind of calculate that in the meantime, like where it's going to hit, and then see if it will hit a person or not. And then you have to also factor in the ping that you have. So if it's 90 milliseconds or 400 milliseconds of ping, how do you juggle around that? Super hard stuff. But I would say that I'm actually going to try the prototype I'm working on might just be a first-person combat system where I will use multiplayer features for it. Specifically, I will try the Steam API, and I'm really curious to see how that will work. But in terms of having asynchronous gameplay, it's a really hard thing. But also, you can just have a normal server where your game just gets data from it, and this is not an asynchronous thing. So for example, this can be more a on-demand sort of request. Say, hey, I'm going to buy this item from the shop. Click the buy button goes into our server. Hey, let's make sure this is available, and it's a legit request. This person has $2 in their account. We will subtract $150 for the item they want to buy. Cool, operation successful. We come back and we say, yep, your request was good. Now you can have this item and own it. It's more streamlined. It's just more like what's called a REST API. It's just more like kind of like on demand, really. Like if you want to do a thing, it happens, but it doesn't happen on every single second. Now if you want to do what's more like asynchronous live multiplayer, here's you need to worry about things like sockets, things like TCP connections, and it just gets really complicated. Let me tell you, there's so many things you need to think about, and specifically, what amount of data are you sending? If you're sending a huge file every second, it's just going to be super laggy. And you also have to factor things like connections losing packets, and this is a totally common thing to happen. And how do you work around those things? So it can be super complex, and I think once I start getting into this prototype more, I will have more reckons for it, but I just know that it's hard. And I would maybe recommend you to start creating your own little REST API with Python or Node.js, just to see how networking works. And reading about CRUD operations, so like create, remove, update, and delete. And so that's usually what we do for most websites, like for that an API does. Like, hey, put some data, give me some data, delete some data. Then I think it will give you a really good idea of like what it's actually entailed when it becomes to a server. And then you can actually go, okay, let's make a game server. Because that's just, I think once you know the foundations again, you will it will make server stuff a lot easier. And I've been reading the Steam API, and it just makes a lot more sense. It's a lot easier to read up now that I know basic stuff. Afi, I can send you my website where you can play my HIO games. I haven't done anything in ages, but hopefully there'll be a few of them soon. And so maybe if I can just go on my screen on the left side, and I go maybe just put this here for now. But I owe you my HIO website. But if you just look up Tim Rod's HIO, it's my brand, so you should find it everywhere, really. But yeah, I'm super excited for what's coming up. And those games that I'm prototyping, they will come. We have GL builds as well, so I'm looking forward to how that's going to work.
Exciting. Yeah, I can't wait to play that. I love it. I think you've done an awesome job of just really pushing the fundamentals of learning the fundamentals. And I think you've done a really great job of just, programming is a complex, language and area to go into. And just for myself, from like a layman's terms, I feel like you've done a really good job of explaining it, like what the benefits are and like what it is that it's actually solving. So really appreciate your time and your ability to explain complex ideas simply and putting attention on learning the foundations of the technology before going too deep into all of these different areas that can distract you and might not be relevant in the next couple of years. So really appreciate your time. Anyone that's interested in following Juan, you can find him on Twitter at Timrods. That's TIMRODZ. And you'll hopefully have like a WebGL build of his prototype game that he's making. I'm excited to hear more about that, and yeah, just your experience on game and web, and how it's kind of molding and shifting, and I'm really interested to see where your path goes in the next couple of years, and kind of if there's a bucket that you would consider yourself more in than another, and if the world kind of starts to merge the two, and the kind of definition of a game as well is another thing that I think is starting to blur, with people being increasingly online. So we'll see how it goes, but I do appreciate your time in the kind of chats that we had. Before I give the closing karakia, is there any final points or piece of advice that you'd like to share to the audience?
Yeah, have an open mind, keep learning, and welcome the fact that you will fail a lot making games, but failure is the best way to learn, personally. And so, yeah, it's a great time to be in this industry. It's wonderful. It'll make cool things, make projects, make stuff that is broken. Like I'm about to embark into this following month, whatever, you get people playing your stuff, and just embrace the feedback.
Awesome. Yeah, love it. You always give really good advice, I think. So it's always good to have you here. I'm just gonna give a closing karakia. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, kia watia, kia mama, te nako, te tinana, te wirairua, I te ara takata, koia rā e rongo, whakairia, ake ki runga, kia tina, tina, huie, takie. That means draw on the supreme sacredness, to clear, to free the heart, the body, and the spirit of mankind. Rongo, suspended high above us, draw together, affirm. Thank you
Love
so
it.
much. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for your time and your attention. Thanks, Juan, for giving us some of your expertise and sharing your insights. And I hope everyone has a good rest of your day. Auckland meetup happening this afternoon that I'll be attending at the Rockwork Studios, so I look forward to that.
Jealous.
And anyone else, look out for the NZGDC is happening in a couple months. There'll be a lot of us there too. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out over Twitter at NZGDA. Any thoughts or questions, we're always there and wanting to engage with the community and provide value. If you have thoughts for guests that you would like on to have these webinars with, please let us know. Otherwise, thanks everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Ka pai, kia ora. Bye-bye.